Hello again and welcome to another bearing removal and installation video featuring Boca bearings. Now today's engine is a beautiful example of early OS quality 4-stroke engineering. Today's engine is my own personal OS FS61 engine. Now these FS61s came out in 1983 and they were actually, this particular one was the pre-version of the Surpass series. So this was one of the original versions before they started making the Surpass series of engines. This engine is in excellent shape, but I'm going to do the bearing upgrade on this engine because I've got some new tools to test out and facilitate this bearing removal and installation. So with all that said, let's go straight to the table, pull some bearings out using some new tools, and install some new ones. Okay, so here on the table I've got my engine case that is just in pristine condition. You can see, I mean, this engine looks basically brand new. It had been run by previous owners, but I just don't know how much. Still has the camshaft bearing installed in there, which is one of the things we're going to be removing, and of course the camshaft bearing in the cover here too. So some of the new tools I've got here is, this one is not as new as I've had this shown this tool in several other videos already, but this is just a continuation of using and testing this tool. This is a tool developed by a friend of mine, Bill, which Boca is also going to be developing into a marketable product. This is actually used to remove the cam bearings in both the cover and the engine case of these style engines. And when I say these style engines, it means not just OS, but it includes Magnum, ASP, and any other engine that had the front mounted camshaft that is supported by ball bearings like that. And you can actually use that to remove the rear timing bearing on Enya 4-stroke engines as well. The other new tool I've got here is, instead of using a piece of wood, Bill sent me this nice beautiful Delrin block to use as my pounder because my piece of wood was just getting beat up. And then also on the bench here I've got my vise with a nice Delrin block that Bill made for me with a hole in it so I can install the bearings in the crankshaft, or in the crankshaft into the case, and you'll see that when we get to that point. So with that said, I still have my same nice trusty hammer that's not worn out, and my heat gun and my heat resistant gloves. So I think the first thing we're going to do is, I think what I want to do here, since my vise is already set up, is I want to go ahead and remove the main bearings first. So I'm going to move some of these tools out of the way, and I'll only use the tools here necessary for this. So I'm just going to put a little bit of heat on this case, and we'll get this crankshaft out and the front bearing out first. Let's see if that's going to be good enough. Now, the one thing I didn't anticipate because of the condition of this engine is I didn't anticipate getting the tool out necessary to remove that bearing should it not come out on the crankshaft. So let's see what happens here. That will dictate whether or not I need an additional tool. And I do, because the bearing stayed in here, and I believe that this might be really flush. So, or there might be a lip. We'll see. We'll have to wait and see. So I'm going to get this front bearing out now, and there should be a nice lip here. I can just get that front bearing out. So our front bearing is out. Now let's see. Do I have a lip that I can get on this? Yes, I do. So I'm not going to need to employ a different type of tool. I can get on this lip here and just and that rear bearing is out now too. So there you have it. Front and rear bearings out. They're really not in bad shape. This one feels a little bit notchy. Could potentially be cleaned up. This front bearing doesn't feel so happy. So that's that. Let me wipe my hands off here real quick, and I'll end up having to go put these parts in the ultrasonic cleaner. Actually, This crankshaft looks so good, it's probably not going to require much of anything at all. Let's see. The inside of this case will take a little bath in the ultrasonic cleaner just to get any residue cleaned up out of that. So the next step is removal of the camshaft bearings of both the crankcase and our timing cover. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move my vise over here. And this is that nice Delrin block that I was just tapping on, as you saw. What I'm going to do is take that out, and this camshaft bearing removal tool, I'm going to quickly run this vise down, and I'm going to grip this back nut here, and I'll explain why I'm doing that once I get it there. So this is the best way I found to actually hold the tool in place to actually use it. So the process here is going to be, I'm going to do the crankcase first, is I'll use this bushing as a centering and buffering mechanism. But what happens here is, this is the expansion rod. Notice it is not inserted in the tool at this time. I'm just going to place it slightly in there. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it all the way in and show you. When I push this expansion rod in, it goes all the way into the very tip, and it expands these jaws just enough so that they'll grip on the bearing, the inner portion of the outer portion, the inner race, but the outer portion of it, because this is going to go all the way through like that and touch that. So I've got this expansion or extraction, or what do I call this, expansion rod out. I'm going to move that out of the way. I'm going to put this bushing in place. Now I'm going to make sure that I've got this nut. This is the nut that's actually going to be used to pull the bearing out. So I'm going to make sure that I can get this fully engaged in that bearing, and it is. And then I'm just going to run this nut up just a little bit. Push my expansion rod in so it locks on that bearing, and then just tighten that there. Now using just an adjustable jaw wrench. This is where the vise helps, because before the first few times I was trying to hold this nut with another set of pliers in my other hand, and it just wasn't as effective. So now all I'm going to do is just start screwing this in. Basically this nut is going this way, and as it's doing that, it's pulling that bearing out. So I'm very excited about the tool that Boca is going to design to do this purpose. Now, as you can see here, that bearing came off very, very easily. Now what I'm going to do to release it, so it's stuck on there, I'm just going to push in on this expansion rod, pull it out, and now our bearing is free to come off, just like that. It's such a beautiful tool. Now, to do that same thing with this little cam cover, you need a slightly different mechanism here. This piece here is conically shaped, so it's kind of a universal fit for the various different thicknesses of these, because all of the OS camshaft bearings and ASP, all of those have the same size bearing, but because of the size of the engine can vary, the thickness of this ring can vary slightly. So it was necessary, instead of having the original tool only had, two different sizes in there, and they kind of were sloppy. This conical design keeps it perfectly centered, and then it'll pull that bearing in, and that bearing will get encapsulated inside this. So the mechanism, the means to do this is exactly the same. I've got it still in there. My expansion rod is out. I'm just going to push this in place there, push this up against it, and then just lightly run this nut. Oops, before I run that nut in there, I want to push my expansion rod in to lock it in place, and run that nut until it's just touching. Hold this so it doesn't rotate on me, and then just start extracting this bearing too. I didn't heat this cover up, I didn't oil it. I mean, this tool is just so fantastic. And here's our cam cover with the bearing off. Now I gotta push that expansion rod in a little bit so I can get it to release on the bearing. Pull the expansion rod out, slide this off, and you're like, ah, where's the bearing? It's a magic trick. Well, the bearing's right in here. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that just the most ingenious, beautiful design? And that's all there is to removing the bearings on this engine using these beautiful tools. So let me get these all cleaned up, and then we'll get ready for the installation portion of the video. Okay, here I am back on the table, all set up to do the bearing installation here. So this crankcase just came out of the cleaner. It's basically looking brand new now. I let it sit in there for a while I went and ran some errands. And the cam cover, nice and clean. All this stuff looks brand new, even this crankshaft. And I really didn't even have to do much of anything to this. So all the parts are ready to go. I've got some new tools here that I'll talk about here eventually too. And I've got the old bearings here and the new bearings. Now, one of the things I always like to use, a product of Boca's that I like to use when I'm reinstalling bearings, is their Lightning Lube Road Power. This is the final assembly lubricant and bearing installation lubricant that I use. I usually just put one single pump into a glass jar, and that's what I'll use to lubricate these parts up. So before I get into talking about the tools or anything, let's just talk about the bearings first. So I got two packages of bearings here. One is for the main crankshaft, the main bearings, and the other is for the camshaft bearings. And the camshaft bearings are always for these style of engines, regardless of the size of the engine. If it's an OS Surpass style forward-mounted cam-driven four-stroke engine, all of these bearings for all the different sizes are the same bearing, and it's CSK 0-003. So that's what these bearings are. And we'll get that little package of bearings out. Now, that bearing size itself just so happens to be an MR 695-ZZC, which means they've got metal shields on them. And I am going to leave those metal shields on them because when it comes to these camshaft bearings, I have no reason to believe that you would ever really want open bearings like this, just because of the fact that it's just going to allow any debris that might get into the engine to go right into those bearings. So the main crankshaft bearings for the case are part number or kit number ENK-081. So let's get those bearings out of here, and we'll see if there's anything we need to do to these, and I believe there is. So this main rear bearing comes in this kit completely open, no shields on it, which is fine. That's exactly how the bearing that came out of the engine came out, and that's how we're going to install it. Now this front bearing, as usual with most of these two-stroke and four-stroke engines, the front or the outer portion is you usually keep a seal on there, or the shield, and then the rear is open. Now this bearing came with shields on both sides, so I'm just going to very quickly remove that. I'm going to move these bearings off to the side, which I've already done with the little camshaft ones. And I'm just going to use a little bitty flat blade screwdriver to just get in here and pop one side of the shield out of this front bearing. And just kind of get in there and lift it up just like that. And now it matches. So that bearing is ready, these bearings are ready, these are all ready to go. So the tools I'm going to be using this time, actually let me go ahead and just do my lubrication thing here. I use my finger, I just lubricate all the areas where the bearings are going to be mating or touching, going in. This one's going to be a little bit tougher to do. So I may just have to put a little pump, one small little pump of oil in there, and hope that I can't stick my finger in there. Yeah, I guess maybe that finger kind of goes in there a little bit. I just want to make sure that these surfaces are lubricated up and ease the installation of the bearings. Okay, so I still have my same nice, beautiful Delron block here, or is it Delrin? I'm not sure how you pronounce that, to use as my drive. The thing that's new and exciting to me here is this. This is a new and updated camshaft bearing insertion tool that Bill devised for me. The original one he had given me didn't have any kind of adjustments on it whatsoever. It was just a piece like this, and you just tapped it into place. So this piece here, the end piece, just perfectly, the cam bearings just perfectly fit on there just like that. It's just a perfect fit. Now the reason you have these knurled knobs is because they're depth setting gauges. So what you'll do to use this thing is you'll wind these all the way out and feel where that needs to go, where it bottoms out against here, and then run this first one right up against there. So that will be your depth set. Now by holding that one and running this second one on there and just giving it a lock, you're locking that in place. So now that you know that you have a known depth for when you go and install that bearing. So you know when it's fully seated. So we're going to do the camshaft bearings first. Let me move some of this stuff out of the way. For me to do this, I need to put my vise here on the table. So when I'm going to put the bearing inside the crankcase, what I like to do is I'll put the bearing, let me put a little bit of lubrication on these bearings here. I like to put it on here, and typically what I would do is just do this and just kind of see it, feel it in there, start going in. And then I gotta put this portion of the case on a firm surface to tap this into place. So I'm just gonna, it just so happens to fit pretty nicely here, but it still needs a little bit of support this way. So I found that my brass drift supports that nicely. So now I've got this in place. Just gonna tap that in place. And apparently these things turned on me because it didn't go in there like I expected. Oh, there we go. Let me just tap this. I'm pretty sure this is already set in place here, so it shouldn't need any additional tapping. So that's in place. So I don't know if I accidentally, in the process of holding this and putting that bearing on there, if I actually turned that or not, because it looks like, oh, there we go. It's stopped there. So this is the first time I think I've really used this tool, and even though I had those right up against there, I think what you really need to do is really hold that and really kind of put a little bit more effort on it there so that it stays. Because in the course of handling it and that kind of thing, it seemed like it must have moved on me. But this bearing is now installed and fully seated, and everything is golden there. Now, when you're installing the camshaft bearing in the cover, you obviously don't really need that depth gauge, the setting there. So basically all I'm going to do here is just kind of stand this up on my Delrin block, just tap this bearing into place, and you can hear the sound of when it's, and see when it's fully installed. So there you go. That's the camshaft bearing installation portion of this. So now for the main bearing, what we're going to do is I'm going to lubricate this bearing up a little bit, the inside, outside. Same thing with this bearing. Won't be able to get my finger on the inside of it. But I always like to install these bearings onto the crankshaft first. And I'll explain why once I get it on there. There we go. So what I do here is I always install the bearing in the crankcase, the front bearing first, and then it acts as a centering mechanism for this rear bearing. Boy, that thing's slippery now and spinny. So that when you're going in there, it's automatically centered this way. So what I'm going to do now is just heat this case up just a little bit, and we'll finish this bearing installation here. Okay, that should be more than adequate. So I'm going to set my front bearing in place, use my nice new block here. Tap that down into place, and the front bearing is seated. Now the beautiful thing about this new, it looks like that's fully seated already, Delrin block that Jim made for me is that it's got a hole in here designed so that I can insert my crankshaft right in there like that, but to me it looks like this thing already went straight in there. So I'm just gonna lightly tap it just to make sure. Yeah, I mean, so that bearing just fell right into place in the crankshaft. Look at that. And there you have it. It's just a beautiful installation. Now this beautiful engine has been upgraded to a nice set of Boca bearings.